Okay, so the next thing we need to start thinking about in our recruitment process, and one of the considerations has to be legalities. Okay, so what we're talking about there is there's a whole lot of different laws, rules, regulations that are brought in to make sure that we're compliant with our legal obligations. And some of those, they break down into a couple of broad categories and acts of parliament that specify what we can and cannot do. And what they're talking about there is things like there's the human rights and equal employment opportunities. Okay, so we're thinking about racial discrimination, we're talking about sex discrimination, and there's acts of parliament that are there to stop us doing that or to actually prescribe against it. What they really cover is that we can't discriminate against a person based on their age. Okay, so we don't have ageism, we accept that people are different ages, we work with that, and we can't say that a job is only for young people. If an older person's able to do it, then they should have the equal opportunity ability to come in there and have a go at that as well. Right? So we start to think about sex. Okay, I can't say, girl wanted, or I can't say this is a man's job. All right, so that's really not for us to decide. If if someone wants to have a go at it and they feel that they're confident to be able to do it, then it's not up to us to determine what gender it is. And sometimes we do that just without really thinking. There was these job ads that used to say like Girl Friday, and what that meant was they just wanted an office assistant. But even just by putting the word girl in there, all of a sudden a bunch of men wouldn't necessarily apply, because even though it wasn't really deliberate, it was just sort of saying for office helper, what it really meant was people saw the girl part of it and went, well, that's not for me, whereas really it could have been anyone doing that job. We also can't discriminate about personal preferences. Okay, personal pref, and we also can't start thinking about physical characteristics. Okay, so what we're saying there is personal preferences, which way they vote. We don't discriminate against their religion. We don't discriminate because they have different beliefs than us. Say that you can only work here if you follow certain beliefs, etc. And also physical characteristics. We can't say they must be fit, strong, and handsome, particularly if it's got nothing to do with the job. All right. So we're not making any discrimination against their physical characteristics. They must look a certain way. Certain hair color, must have certain color eyes. Okay, remember, this is a job process, not a beauty contest. If you're running a beauty contest, we'll have a different conversation with you then. But the reality is, everyone should be equally able to apply and be considered equally on their merit for the position. Right, so age, sex, personal preferences, can't discriminate there, and physical characteristics. If it's not relevant, it shouldn't be in there, at all. So make sure that we're covering that. Yes, there might have some things about physical stuff, particularly if it's a hard labouring job, in which case what you do is you talk about the actual tasks that are involved, and then the person's going to start to think about that anyway. If the job involves picking up large objects, you might need to think about, is there a different way to do it, or that's what the job's going to entail. And then the person has the choice or the understanding that they can say, whether they want to participate in that or not. But really it's about, you're not discriminating, you're making sure that it's relevant to the job. Anything you're asked for has to be tied precisely back to what you're doing. There has to be a rational, relevant reason for it, and you need to make sure that it's compliant with the various government acts, that you're not accidentally or directly discriminating against the person and not giving them an equal chance for anyone else to come and apply for that role. All right, so that's the first thing we need to think about. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, and the next consideration here, is disclosure. And what we're really starting to think about here, or our legal obligation, is that we need to make sure under disclosure law, we are required to make sure that we tell the person everything that's involved here. So it's actually against the law to intentionally leave out important job information that might affect the person choosing to take the role. Okay, so we advertise a job, and we've seen this before where they advertise it, they say it's one thing. When you get there, you find out, oh yeah, we didn't sort of tell you something really important. Okay, and that can be anything from, they're going to be working at heights and no one ever told them that, or any other sort of area that might cause them concern, grief, or or a problem. We've seen that unfortunately in the back of Gumtree. It happens all the time. Not saying anything wrong with Gumtree. We love it. Perfectly great platform. But there are some unscrupulous advertisers that ask people to come and do jobs for them. And when they get there, they find out the working conditions aren't anything like what was promised. That they say this is the salary. What they don't tell you is on a commission basis that some other person earns. So they give you these crazy figures. I've seen a lot of people go for hospitality jobs and they ask for girls between 18 and 25 who are good looking and great with working with crowds, and they get there, totally different job than the one they were expecting to get and what was advertised. Okay, so this is really the problem here, is that sometimes they can be a little less than honest with what's going on and what the job's actually going to entail, okay? Totally against the law. On the other hand, what we also have under the disclosure provisions is that when the candidate comes to you, they need to disclose or identify any limitations they have in carrying out the job and the task. So as a prime example, I had a candidate who came to me for a job. I pointed out to them that the job would involve significant amounts of domestic travel within Australia, from Sydney to Perth to Melbourne, all around the country, often at short notice, needing to respond to fairly quick moving situations on the ground. I asked them if they were okay with that. Yes, they were perfectly fine. They were more than happy to travel around. They didn't have any commitments that were going to prevent that. That was fantastic, ideal candidate for me. In their first week of employment, when they came in on deck and they'd assured me they were good to go, obviously the first thing came up, and I needed that person to go from Sydney to Western Australia. And then they told me actually they were terrified of flying, couldn't possibly fly, and the only way they could travel to Perth was either by train or by bus, which was effectively a 3-day journey either way. So anytime they had to go to Melbourne, that was going to take me basically a whole day to ship them from one place to the other because they were unable to fly. Clearly, this was something they probably should have brought up when we said there were significant amounts of air-based travel. Okay, after they got the job, then they told me this wasn't going to be the case. So look, even though you make it explicitly clear, sometimes they might not necessarily be completely upfront with you, and obviously that's a bit of a deal breaker. Okay, I had to disclose that the job had a lot of domestic travel, but they really should have, as part of their obligations, disclosed to me that there was going to be a significant impact against that, and they were not going to be able to be effectively able to carry out the day-to-day parts of that job. And clearly, shipping them around the country, taking 3 days to get them to a different place, wasn't really going to work for that job. They might have been perfectly suited to a different job within the organisation, that's what ended up happening, but they certainly weren't necessarily going to work with that one. The next concern is workplace health and safety, the WHS, which replaced the old occupational health and safety. And what we're talking about there is that we need to make sure that when we're looking at the job, we take into full account all the associated risks and dangers associated with them performing the job and identify them and discuss them at the interview. For example, if you're a taxi driver in Sydney late at night, okay, well, you're going to be by yourself in a taxi in a remote location with a carload of strangers and money on a dark night. Okay, there are risks associated with this job. There is long periods of driving, you may be subject to fatigue, and you're driving a motor vehicle. Okay, all of these things we need to tell people at the very, very beginning, this is what's going on. We can also tell them about how we're going to mitigate and deal with those risks, but we need to make sure they're aware of them at the beginning so that they can say, well, hang on, that's a bit of a concern for me. Same, I need to also make sure that all their certifications and provisions are up to date. Okay, if they're in the construction industry, that they have the right certifications. If they're driving my taxi, that they're fully licensed and they haven't been denied a license. Because if I put them on the road and they have an accident, I'm going to be liable. There's going to be a problem there. I had a duty of care. Same, if they're working in a pub, that they have the responsible service of alcohol and they're aware of the dangers of nightclubs, whatever it happens to be. Okay, so the workplace health and safety factor is certainly something I need to make sure that I'm disclosing very early at the beginning. Okay? The other one is, as I say, those qualifications and certifications. Qualifications and certs. Okay, all we're saying there is that as part of the job, as part of the legislative requirements, it's going to say, the definition of how the role is going to work and what's going to be put in there. Okay, so if I'm able to drive, it's going to tell me what I can drive, it's going to tell me where I can drive, it's going to tell me what I'm able to do, and I need to be mindful of all those different laws. I know that I'm in the logistics industry quite a lot as well, and when I'm moving in within the logistics space, I need to think about, well, what do my truckies, when they're driving their trucks, how many hours can they travel on a road before they need to take the mandatory breaks? How big a vehicle can they drive under their licensing condition? And start to think about that and think about what I'm really going to be asking them to do. Okay, I need to make sure that lines up so I'm not asking them to do anything that they're not qualified for or outside what's going to happen. Okay, we don't want to create any legal problems for ourselves. Okay, we need to think about what are the other government rules and regulations. So as I just said, when I'm talking about moving my truck drivers up and down the road, look, that's pretty straightforward. There's laws and regulations that say how that needs to happen. Okay, so they need to keep certain logbooks. They need to keep certain timings. There's certain requirements that they have. Same if they're going to drive a taxi, they need to get health checks, etc. Now what happens is I need to make sure that as an employer, I'm keeping an eye on those rules and regulations so that all my people who are out there are still compliant. And it also comes down to the way they're employed. Okay, is it still legal to employ that way? Do I need to change their job description, their job titles? Do I need to pay them differently? Has there been a change in the pay and conditions across their industry? Okay, so I need to think about going to the appropriate government department and keeping an eye on what's going there. Okay, so I need to be thinking about not only the employment, but also industry. Okay, so there's probably a government portfolio to do with that, and I need to have a look at who that is. So for my truck drivers, obviously I'm going to start thinking about roads and maritime service. I need to really keep an eye on what's going on there for any changes that they need to be abreast of, because that's going to affect me. The same as Department of Employment, workplace relations. I need to be involved in DOER as well to see, am I paying them correctly? Am I training them correctly? Is that covered? The other thing is that if there is any going to be complaints or problems, Fair Go Australia. Okay, Fair Go Australia is the body that my employees, if they feel they're not getting the right things or the right treatment and conditions, that's going to be the legal body they go to put any disputes. So if I don't fairly terminate their employment or there's a dispute there, they're perfectly within their rights to contact Fair Go Australia. And that's probably legal stuff. Okay, so now that we've thought about all the basic legalities and the to's and fro's of how it's going to go in the workplace, we also need to start thinking about some of the other considerations. One of them is confidentiality. Okay, not only is it the polite and correct thing to do to keep details, confidential between us and our potential applicants or people that we're starting to deal with, it's also a legal requirement. So we have a duty of care when we're dealing with people that any information they give us that could be used, that information that can be very damaging to them. Okay, so we need to really consider, who sees and shares what information. Okay, if someone's going for a different job, that can damage their relationships with their existing employer. So I need to make sure that we keep it fairly quiet. There might also be a whole lot of information in their job application they don't necessarily want their work colleagues to see. It could also be if they're moving because they're unsuited to their current work, they're experiencing problems, whether medical, whatever it happens to be, and they're requesting a transfer and they're asking for our consideration in that, then that sort of information could actually be really damaging between them and the rest of their colleagues. Okay, so there's a whole lot of reasons why information that's being passed between you and your potential new applicant it could be really harmful to them. So we need to make sure that we really look at who has access to that information, who's going to see the paperwork, who's going to be able to read that. Now, realistically, we should be storing that for 7 years. Okay, and in today's modern environment, there's no reason why we can't very easily keep an archive. And the reason we do that is if anything occurs in the future, the statute of limitations allows them several years to go, I felt discriminated against or I felt picked on or something didn't go. And if you go to court, it's just so much easier if you can back it up with the documentation that was taken at the time. To go back and say to someone, hey, you interviewed Fred 7 years ago, what happened? You've got no chance of recollecting that. So making sure that you've got a fairly detailed process, you've kept the records, you've kept them secure, you've kept them tight, you've made sure that limited people can see them, that's the sort of stuff you need to keep, okay, your selection criteria, etc. It's just going to keep you out of legal hot water if someone feels that they haven't had the right thing done to them. And same, it gives them some peace of mind that you're not sharing their information with people who don't need to see that information. And some of the basic information that we might start talking about, things like individual contact details. Okay, so we need to make sure that we keep their contact details confidential and private. Okay, once again, even emailing back sometimes can create problems, or leaving messages for people, all that sort of gear, probably not such a good look. We need to make sure that we keep out their personal specifics. Okay, we don't want people to access the person's specifications, including their health status, Okay, so if they're moving because they've had a health condition or something like that, that's the sort of information we really need to keep confidential. If that gets out, that can be highly damaging. Same, if they can be identified as applying for a job or applying for dealing with our company, that can send a message and have a whole lot of unintended consequences that can be quite negative. So we really need to keep that quiet. We also need to think about their REM. Okay, so we don't reveal information about how much that person's being paid, okay? So we don't talk about their salary with other people. We have access to fairly private confidential data. We're not entitled to share that, and we need to make sure that that's protected, okay? And we also need topic and specific. Okay, so any of their other specific personal information that can be traced directly to them needs to stay off there, okay? So these are the sorts of things that we need to keep really tight. We need to control that. So once again, their contact details, their name, their phone number and all that. Like, I mean, obviously you don't want your phone number pasted all over the place. So they don't either. Same email addresses, whatever it happens to be. Their personal specifics, you know, all their personal details and their personal particulars, even their experience and that sort of stuff, really not cool to share. Same as the REM package, okay, we don't talk about salaries of people with other people. You know, it's limited to a who needs to know basis and not something that should be passed around your office for everyone to get a bit of a look at. And same for all the topical and specific information, really has no place being shared or stored with anyone other than who needs to see it. Okay, now when we're talking about the breach of confidentiality there can be a whole lot of different penalties. You know, if your staff share that information around, you know, that could lead to, you know, instant dismissal in an organization, you know, revealing customer information, you know, or in this case, job applicant information across a company or to a third party can lead to instant dismissal from a company. At a company level, they can be prosecuted as well, and they can have penalties and fines, and depending on how bad it is, it can actually lead to things like jail time, okay? So it really is a highly serious, highly sensitive thing. You cannot disclose widely people's information. You must maintain their personal particulars and the privacy of that person, okay? You can't discuss the personal information at any time unless it's specifically job related. So if you're discussing with a HR person, fair enough. You've got a HR advisor that's assisting you picking a person, you can share that information on that need-to-know basis. What it doesn't do is form part of your water cooler, having a chat at the lunch table type conversation. Certainly don't do that, okay? Even once you've moved on from the position, even if you have nothing to do with that job in the future, that application stays there. You don't discuss with applicants, you don't discuss it with their competitors, and you certainly don't discuss it with staff members who don't need to know or be involved in that process legitimately. Store the information, keep it away, keep it secure, private, you know, whatever way you want to organize it in your company. Retain it, make sure you keep all your current notes, whatever you had, put it all together, put it away. Now, 7 years, easy, no trouble at all. If you do that, you should be okay. Just start thinking about what government departments you need to use across the whole process. Think about what professional associations might be able to help you. If they're an accountant, you know, go to their body. If they're, you know, from HR, go to AHRI, AHRI, the Human Resources Institute, whoever you need to deal with. Think about who they are. Think about how they can help you. Industry experience. Maintain your legalities. Think about your confidentiality, and frankly, you should be okay, and you'll keep yourself out of the sticky parts of the law. Department of Employment, you know, workplace relations, pretty good, and Fair Go Australia have heaps of information, as does your various trade union organisations. Good luck with that. Cheers.